Let's bring in author James Robinault, who penned a Vanity Fair article, spoke with Landis. Thank you so much for being with us. I had a chance to read your article. How significant is this new account if it is, in fact, true?
Well, it is the biggest news since 1964 when the Warren Commission issued its report. This is brand new information. It was never shared until now. And Paul Landis, who's the Secret Service agent we're talking about, Jackie Kennedy's Secret Service agent, was there that day. He was in the follow-on car called Halfback, and he saw the president's head explode. You can see him in the film and in all the photographs in the car right behind the limousine. They then sped to Parkland Hospital with the president, mortally wounded. And when they got there, Paul jumped out of Halfback and with fellow agent Clint Hill tried to get Mrs. Kennedy to let go of the president, who she cradled in her lap. She would not do so for quite a while. Finally, Clint took his coat off and put it over the president's head, and she agreed to get up. When she stood up, he saw two bullet fragments on the actual seat itself, and then up on the ledge right behind where Kennedy's back would have hit the ledge when he was hit with the final shot, was this intact, pristine bullet that he picked up and took with him into the hospital. Once he was in the hospital, he left it on Kennedy's stretcher. He and Mrs. Kennedy were in trauma room 1 for about a minute, and he left it on the stretcher knowing Kennedy was mortally wounded and dead and wanted the bullet to be with his body at the time of the autopsy. So it's hugely significant because it completely undercuts the Warren Commission's single bullet theory.
It truly does, James. I mean, at the heart of this account, this largely intact bullet, how did it wind up on the ledge of that back seat?
Yeah, I mean, as I wrote in Vanity Fair, we're never going to know for sure, but what seems to have happened is Kennedy was shot right back here in his upper shoulder, not in his neck, as the Warren Commission said, but upper shoulder. And it appears the bullet was undercharged, which happened with these World War II vintage bullets that were being used. So it was sticking out of his back. The final shot pushes him back violently against the chair that he's sitting in, the back seat. And it either dislodged at that point on its own, or you can see in this film you're showing, the Zapruder film, Mrs. Kennedy has her arms around him and literally brushes the area where that bullet would have been sticking out. And it may have gotten put into her clothing because, as you know, she then turned and tried to grab a piece of his skull that had been blasted onto the back of the car. And she stretches way out over before Clint Hill saves her and puts her back in. Right where she stretched over, if it was in her clothing, is where Paul found the bullet. So one of those two ways, I think, is how it got there.
I mean, James, this is so fascinating. All of these decades later, Americans, people around the world, I think, are so fascinated about this. But let's talk about motivation. Why do you think Paul Landis is choosing to come forward at this point? He is 88 years old. I know you said he's very physically active. He certainly has his wits about him. But how confident should we feel about his ability to remember after so much time? I mean, it's hard for all of us. It can be hard to remember what we did last week.
I know. I was very skeptical when I read the book, and I've spent about 15 sessions with him working through all of this. And I can tell you his memory is better than mine. I wish I had as good a memory as he does. But, if you say to anybody my age or older, where were you on the day Kennedy was assassinated, they know exactly where they were and who they were with and what happened. It's an indelible memory. Same with 9/11 today. You ask people of the younger generation, where were they on 9/11? They all remember that. Do you remember the day before? No. Do you remember the day after? No. But that day you do remember. So it's a very indelible memory for him. And, he's coming forward now because 10 years ago, he read a book for the first time about the assassination and saw that they had this central fact wrong, that they said they found the bullet on Governor Conley's stretcher. And Paul was like, no, I brought that bullet in and left it on JFK's stretcher. So they had this fundamental fact wrong, and he began to ask people about it and then decided to write his book. But it's taken a period of time because he's not a writer.
Right.
He had to get this all together.
So, this calls into question, again, the whole lone gunman theory. Do you think Lee Harvey Oswald did act alone, especially if this information from Landis is true?
But here's the problem. If it stuck in Kennedy's back and did not transit and then hit Governor Conley, you can see on the Zapruder film that Kennedy is reacting to being shot as he comes out from behind that sign, and a second later, Conley reacts. It is not enough time for Lee Harvey Oswald to do his bold action, which takes at least 2.3 seconds to, turn it and aim and fire. So a second is too soon. It means Oswald couldn't have hit Kennedy with the first bullet and then Conley with the second bullet. So if that's true, and it really did stick in his back and there was a second bullet, it really raises exponentially the possibility that there was a second shooter. And if that's true, there may have been multiple shooters. So it really changes everything.
Well, thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.